I sold everything I had. I left my family in India and I went to the United States believing I was going to live the American dream. But within a few months, I lost my job, ran out of money, and ended up sleeping on the streets. In a country where no one even knew my name. So West Park wasn't the code or the hunger, it was realizing that I had destroyed my own life by believing in something that was never real. If you think you know how this story ends, you're wrong. My name is Rajesh Kumar. I am 48 years old, and for a long time, I believed I was living the dream that millions of people long for, the American dream. But today, looking back, I can say with absolute certainty, it was the worst mistake of my life. I was born in a small town in northern India. It wasn't a famous place, nor beautiful like the ones that appear in movies. It was simply dusty streets, cramped houses, and a heat that never seemed to go away. But it was my home. I grew up there, surrounded by my family, my parents, my brothers, and a life that, despite being hard, was honest. For many years, I worked as a mechanic. I didn't earn much, but I managed to support my wife and 2 children. I always took pride in that. I never let food run short. I never let my children go to bed hungry. But there was something inside me, restlessness. I would watch videos, hear stories, listen to people talk about the United States. They said that there, those who worked hard could make it. They said that there, even someone starting from nothing could build a better life. I saw big houses, new cars, clean streets, and that started to grow inside me. The American dream. At first, it was just a distant thought, something I would mention now and then to my friends. Like a fantasy, but over time, it became a plan. I remember as if it were yesterday the day an acquaintance of mine came back from the United States to visit his family. I looking different, expensive clothes, a new phone, speaking with confidence. He seemed like a different person. I asked him, is it really worth it? And he answered, without a second's hesitation, with every sacrifice. That phrase got stuck in my head. That night, I barely slept. I lay staring at the ceiling, imagining what my life would be like there. Thinking about my children studying in good schools, my wife living more comfortably, myself finally having the life I had always wanted. That was the moment I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to the United States, but nothing was easy from the start. To get there, I had to sell practically everything I owned. I sold my motorcycle, which I used for work. I borrowed money from relatives. I took on debts I didn't know if I could ever repay. My wife cried. She held my hand and said, what if something goes wrong? I tried to seem strong. I told her everything would be fine. I said it was for them. For our future. I said I would come back rich or that I would bring all of them with me, but deep down, I was scared too. The day of my departure was one of the hardest days of my life. My children hugged me as if they didn't want to let go. My youngest son asked, Dad, when are you coming back? And he didn't know what to say. He just said, soon. But that was a lie. He didn't know when he would return. He didn't even know if he would. When the plane took off, I looked out the window and felt something strange in my chest. It wasn't as fear, it was as if a part of me was being left behind. Even so, I kept going, because I believed I was heading toward my dream. When I arrived in the United States, everything seemed exactly as I had imagined, at least at first. The city lights, the tall buildings, the organized streets, it was all impressive. I felt small, but at the same time full of hope. I thought, I made it. Now my life is going to change. But I had no idea what was really waiting for me. In the first few days, I stayed at an acquaintance's house, sharing it with 4 other people. The space was small, cramped, but I didn't mind. I kept telling myself it was just the beginning. I needed to work. And first, I found my first job within a few days. It was at a construction site. Hard work much harder than I was used to. I woke up before sunrise and came back when it was already dark. My body ached every single day, but I didn't complain, because I believed it was all part of the process. The problem is that, as the weeks went by, things began to change. I realized it wasn't as simple as I had imagined. The money didn't go as far as they said. The cost of living was high, very high. I worked more than 12 hours a day, and even then, it never seemed to be enough. And then came the first signs that something was wrong, small details that, at first, I ignored, but that, little by little, began to frighten me. That was when I started to understand that the American dream might not be a dream for everyone, and that, in my case, it was beginning to turn into something else. Something I still couldn't quite explain, but that was already consuming me from the inside. In the first few months, I did everything I could to convince myself I was on the right path. I woke up every day before dawn, my body heavy and my mind exhausted. But I would repeat to myself, it's just a phase, everything will get better. But it didn't get better. The work at the construction site was far harder than I had imagined. He carried heavy loads all day, climbed up and down stairs with equipment, was exposed to extreme cold and heat, and even so, no one seemed to care if he slowed down. Someone would shout if he made a mistake. He was treated as if he had no wit. He didn't understand everything people said, because my English wasn't good, and that only made things worse. Sometimes they laughed at me. Other times, they acted as if he didn't exist. That began to hurt me in ways he hadn't expected. Back in India, he was a simple man, but respected. He had my work, my home, my family. He was someone. There he felt invisible, over time. He began to notice that it wasn't just me. Many of those who worked alongside me were also immigrants. Mexicans, Indians, Africans, all of us there. Doing the heavy-ass work, and all with the same expression on their faces. Exhaustion, resignation, silence. No one talked much about their problems. It was as if everyone already knew it wouldn't do any good. But one night, after a particularly hard day, a colleague sat down beside me. His name was Arjun, also Indian. He looked at me and asked, "Do you still believe this is what it is?" He stayed silent for a few seconds. Then he answered, "I need to believe it is." He gave us a smile and said, "Something I never forgot. He used to say that too in the beginning." That phrase echoed in my head for days. That was when something inside me started to change. He began to pay close attention. He started to see things he had previously ignored, like the fact that many of us worked more hours than allowed without being properly compensated, like the constant fear of losing a job, like say, even greater fear of drawing attention and having problems with documents. He lived on high alert at all times. Every siren he had on the street made my heart race. Every unfamiliar person looking at me felt like a threat. That was no way to live. But he kept going, because he had a debt, because he had a family waiting for me, because he couldn't simply give up. He started saving every cent. He stopped buying basic things. He ate as cheaply as possible. Sometimes he skipped meals. He wanted to send money home. He wanted to show that all of it was worth something. But when he finally managed to send the first amount, it was smaller than he had imagined. Much smaller. My wife called me that day. Her voice was happy, but weighed at the same time. She said, "Are you okay? You sound different, Elliot." He said everything was great. He said the work was good. He said that soon everything would get better. But when he hung up the phone, he felt an enormous emptiness. Because, for the first time, he realized he was lying not only to her, but to myself. The months passed and the situation didn't improve. In fact, it got worse. My body began showing signs of wear, constant pain in my back, my arms, my legs. I no longer had energy for anything. And my mind was even worse. I started feeling lonely, very lonely, even surrounded by people. I felt like I didn't belong there. I missed my family. I missed the food from my home. I even missed the simple things like sitting on the doorstep at the end of the afternoon and just talking. That everything was rushed, cold, distant. And then, one day something happened. Something that completely changed the way I saw all of it. It was an ordinary morning. I was at work doing the same as always, carrying materials, trying not to draw attention, until I heard screaming. One of the workers had gotten hit. It was serious. I fell from a considerable height and lay on the ground, unable to move. Everyone stopped. For a moment, I thought they were going to help, but that's not what happened. The foreman looked on nervously and said, "Keep working." He couldn't believe what he had. The man was on the ground, clearly needing help, and the order was to keep going. Some even tried to go near him, but were held back. Minutes later, someone finally called for help, but that stayed with me. In that moment, I understood something no one had told me before he came. There we were irreplaceable. If something happened to one of us, another would take our place. No questions, no consent, no web. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling, remembering everything he had left behind. My family, my life, my dignity, all of it for a dream that was crumbling before my eyes, and for the first time since I'd asked myself, what if he made a mistake? But that question was only the beginning. Because what was coming would make me wish he had never left India. After the Texas and Ted work, something inside me broke. He tried to carry on as before, tried to ignore it, to pretend nothing had changed, but he couldn't anymore. Same a job that meant lying on the ground wouldn't leave my mind. And worse than that was the reaction of the people around me. No one seemed truly shocked. No one seemed outraged. It was as if it were normal. And maybe it really was. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at work became strange. Quiet at the new chair. I noticed glances, whispers, but no one spoke openly about what had happened. Until, a few days later, I found out the truth. The man who fell never came back. No one properly explained what happened to him. They only said he was no longer working there. That was it. As if he had never existed. as if he were just another one that sent a chill through me, because for the first time I put myself in his place. What if it had been me? WHO would care, WHO would notify my family, would anyone even know my name? Those questions began to consume me, and that was when fear stopped being something passing and became constant. I started walking through the streets with my head down. I avoided making eye contact. I avoided any kind of trouble. I just wanted to survive. But surviving wasn't a plan. I came here to live better, and at that moment I was living worse than ever. My routine became a tiring, meaningless cycle. Wake up, wake, eat poorly, sleep little, repeat. No joy, no hope, no clear future, and worst of all, no easy way out, because he was already in too deep. So that he had taken on. To come to the United States was still there. My family depended on the money he sent, even if it was little. I couldn't just give up, or at least that's what I told myself. But the truth is that, deep down, I was already beginning to give up on the inside. It was during this time that I started getting closer to Arjan. It was one of the few people I could truly talk to. Maybe because he had been there longer, or maybe because he carried the same weight. He did. One night, after work, we set outside the house where we lived. The cold was strong, but neither of us wanted to go outside. He looked at me and said, "Have you ever thought about going back?" That caught me off guard. It took a while to answer. Then he said, "Every single day." He was silent for a while. Then he replied, "So why don't you go?" He took a deep breath and said something that, at that moment, seemed to make sense, because he can't go back empty-handed. He let out a small laugh, but not out of humor. It was out of sadness. And then he said, "That's what keeps us here." That phrase hit me like a punch, because it was true. He wasn't trapped by the United States. He was trapped by pride. Be the fear of letting people down. Be the fear of admitting he had been wrong. In the days that followed, that idea never left my head. I began to notice how many people were in the same situation, trapped, working without stop, not because they were happy, but because they saw no other option. It was like an invisible trap, and the longer you stayed, the harder it was to leave. But the West was still to come, because up until then, I still had work. I still had a source of income. I still had a routine, as hard as it was. But all of that changed in a single day. It was a cold morning, colder than usual, when I arrived at the site. I noticed something strange. Some people were being pulled aside, one by one, and then they left. No explanation, no warning. My heart started racing. I tried to focus on the work, to pretend nothing was happening, but it was impossible. Until I had my name, Rajesh. In that moment, I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath me. I walked over to the foreman. Everly looked at me. He simply said, "We don't need you anymore." Just like that. No thank you, no notice, nothing. I tried to ask why, but he had already turned to call the next person. And that was how, in a matter of seconds, I lost everything. I left there not knowing what to do, with no direction, no job, not enough money, no plan. The city that here once seemed full of opportunity. In that moment felt enormous and completely indifferent to my existence. I walked for hours that day, with no destination, without thinking clearly, just walking, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. I remembered my decision, months before, full of hope, full of plans, and now we had nothing. Nothing but regret. When I finally stopped, I sat down on a bench on the street. I looked around, people passing, cars. Noise, but to me, everything was silent. It was in that moment, alone, lost, not knowing what to do, that I felt something I had never felt before. Despair. Real despair. Deep. Heavy. And for the first time since I set foot in that country, I thought something that frightened me. Maybe I never should have come, but I still didn't know that this was only the beginning of the worst phase of my life. Losing my job was like losing solid ground. In the first few days, I still tried to stay calm. I told myself it was just a setback, that I would find another job quickly, that everything would work out. But deep down, I already knew it wouldn't be that simple. I woke up the next day early, the new shell, as if I still had somewhere to be. My body had been conditioned to that routine. But, for the first time since I've been in the United States, I had no work. And that feeling was worse than exhaustion. It was emptiness, even so. I went out. I walked through the streets, looking for any opportunity. I went into places, asked around, tried to talk to people, but most didn't even pay attention. Some said they weren't hiring, others wouldn't even let me finish my sentence. And then there were those who simply looked at me and completely ignored my presence. With every no, I felt my hope diminish a little more. The days went by and the money started running out. I was doing calculations all the time. How much I had left, how much I spent each day, how many days I could survive that way, and the answers finally got worse. I began cutting everything I could. I started eating only the bare minimum. sometimes just 1 meal a day. It seemed upset, but that was becoming my reality. The house where I lived also began to weigh on me. I shared space with other people, and everyone there was also struggling to survive. No one was in any position to help anyone else. The atmosphere grew tense, silent. Each peasant trapped in their own problems, and I began to feel that I was no longer welcome there. Not because anyone had said so, but because he was no longer contributing the way he used to. And in that kind of situation, that makes a difference. One night, the owner of the house called me over to talk. I already knew what he was going to say. I tried to be polite, but he was dead. If you can pay, you'll have to leave. I nodded without being able to say anything, because I knew he was right. But that didn't make the situation any less painful. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything collapsing on top of me. No work, no money, no security, no one to tend to. I thought about my family. I thought about my wife. WHO. Believed I was building something. I thought about my children. WHO perhaps still believed I was living the dream I had invented myself. And, for the first time, I felt ashamed. Ashamed of myself. Ashamed of having believed so blindly. Ashamed of not having listened to the signs. But it was too late. Far too late. In the days that followed, I tried everything. Temporary work, weak jobs, anything. I managed to get a few odd jobs, but they weren't stable. Poorly paid and didn't solve the problem. It was like trying to fill a bucket full of holes. And then the day I had feared most arrived. I no longer had money to stay where I was. I packed my few belongings in silence. No one said anything. No one asked. And I didn't want to explain either. I left that house with a backpack and an enormous weight inside me. I had nowhere to go. No plan. No certainty. Nothing. In that moment, I understood what it truly means to be completely alone. I began wandering the streets with no direction, trying to find somewhere to stay, some shelter, anything. The cold seemed more intense, the noise of the city more distant, and it more invisible than ever. That night, I had nowhere to sleep. I walked until I found a more secluded spot, a corner where other people were also gathered, people like me, lost, forgotten, ignored. There, for the first time, I saw myself at rock bottom. I sat on the ground, hugged my knees, and stayed there, in silence. No strength left, no hope, not knowing how I had reached that point. WHO had left India full of dreams, was now there without a home, without dignity, without direction. And it was on that night, staring into nothing, that a single phrase kept repeating in my mind. It was the worst mistake of my life. But the pain still wasn't over, because what came after was even harder to bear. That first night on the street was the longest of my life. The cold was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just physical, it seemed to enter inside me. As if it were freezing my thoughts, my strength, my hope. I tried to sleep, but it couldn't. Every sound startled me. Every peasant who walked by put me on edge. I held my backpack tightly, afraid of losing even that because it was all I still had. But the worst part wasn't the cold. It wasn't the fear. It was the feeling of failure. I kept looking up at the sky, trying to understand. At what point, everything had spun out of control. I remembered the day I left India, the promise I made to my family, the trust they had placed in me, and now, I was there. With nothing. With no one. Without even seekage to call me and tell the truth. The days that followed were even harder. I began to learn in the worst way possible. How to survive in that situation. Where to find food. Where to find a safe place to rest. How to avoid trouble. I saw things I never thought I would see. People fighting over scraps of food, people completely lost, talking to themselves with no hope whatsoever, and little by little I began to realize I was becoming part of that scene. That frightened me more than anything else, because I felt I was losing myself, losing who I was, losing my identity, losing my dignity. There was one day when I looked at my reflection in a shop window and I barely recognized myself. A tired face, eyes with no light in them, an unkempt beard. Dirty clothes. That was not the man. WHO had left India full of dreams. That was someone broken. Completely broken. It was in that moment that something inside me changed. I realized that if I kept going that way, it would disappear. Not just physically, but as a person. And I could not let that happen. Not for the United States. Not for money. But for my family. For my children. I needed to go back. But it wasn't simple. I still had debts. I still had shame. I still had fear. But, for the first time in a very long time, I had clarity. Clarity that staying there would be the real failure, not going back. Going back would be surviving. In the days that followed, I began to seek help. It was hard, very hard. But I found people WHO somehow pointed me in the right direction, He got in contact with a group that helped immigrants in difficult situations. It wasn't quick or easy, but little by little he began to see a way out. It took weeks until he was able to sort everything out. With no money, depending on others, swallowing my pride every single day, but with one single goal: to go home. And then the day came. The day would set foot in India again. When he boarded the plane, it was completely different from the first time. Before, he was full of dreams. Now, he was full of scars. But, strangely, he also felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time: relief. When the plane landed, my heart began to race. And when he finally stepped off and saw my family waiting for me, he couldn't hold it together. He wept. He wept like he had never wept before. My children held me tight. My wife just looked at me, her eyes full of tears. And in that moment he understood everything. He didn't need the American dream. He didn't need wealth. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He just needed to be there. withcm.alag.pericent.wvholi.to When he looked back, he don't see only a mistake. He see a lesson. A hard one, a painful one, but a necessary one, because now you know that not every dream days elude is real. And that sometimes what looks like an opportunity may be nothing more than a trap in disguise. If he could go back in time, he would not have gone. He would have stayed. With little but with peace. With hardships but with dignity. Because no promise is worth the price of losing yourself. My name is Rajesh Kumar. I am 48 years old. And he thought he was living the American dream, but he was completely wrong.